And that's really freaking sad. One of the things that really frustrated me after this was how the media, of course, they jumped in to be all like, oh, we condemn violence, on both sides. They always got to both sides it. That's what they do, and that's one of the things that frustrates me about the media. Like, we need to stop acting like all violence is equal violence, because it's not. It's not. And, this whole like media rhetoric where they go and they're like, oh, we condemn violence. We believe in nonviolence at all costs. It really frustrates me because it creates a false equivalence between people who are initiating violence and people who are responding to the violence that's been initiated against them. I used to be a pacifist. I used to believe in nonviolence. I used to believe in nonviolence as a tactic. And then I read this one quote that woke me the hell up. And I'm going to read it right here. Quote, "Nonviolence is an inherently privileged position in the modern context. Besides the fact that the typical pacifist is quite clearly white and middle class, pacifism is an ideology that comes from a privileged context. It ignores that violence is already here, that violence is unavoidable, structurally integral. It's a structurally integral part of the current social hierarchy, and that it is people of color who are most affected by violence. Pacifism assumes that white people who grew up in the suburbs with all their basic needs met can counsel oppressed people, many of whom are people of color, to suffer patiently under an inconceivably greater violence until such time as the great white father is swayed by the movement's demands, or the pacifists achieve that legendary, quote, critical mass, end quote. This is from Peter Gelderloos in How Nonviolence Protects the State, if you want to look this up. When I read that quote, I had to take a moment and sit down. And it's 100% freaking true. Nonviolence, being nonviolent is a position of privilege. Only the people who are not experiencing violence being enacted on them get to be nonviolent. And it's interesting because the people who claim nonviolence, those are the same people who outsource their violence to the police and to the military. Of course, you don't have to be nonviolent. Of course, you don't have to be violent in your quaint little suburbs. You don't have to be violent because you can outsource. You pay people to do your violence for you. You pay soldiers and you pay police officers to go out and enact that violence on your behalf. So it's a hypocrisy because you're not nonviolent. You're actually supporting a violent state. And when you do this, what you create is a false equivalency. And so you put people who are being abused and having violence enacted onto them, you put them on the same level as the people who are doing the violence. And it's not the same. Defending yourself against violence is not the same. And what you do is you excuse the people who are doing the violence by then turning around and being like, well, both sides, nobody should be doing violence. You're excusing their behavior. You're falling right into their trap. They preach nonviolence while paying police to beat black and brown people in their communities. They preach nonviolence while paying soldiers to drop bombs across the planet. They preach nonviolence, but they support all kinds of state-sanctioned violence. And that state-sanctioned violence falls on the most vulnerable and marginalized people: black and brown people, poor people, women, children. We're the ones that suffer from that nonviolent violence. This is another quote that I thought was so great. This is from Arundhati Roy when it comes to nonviolence. Quote, "Can the hungry go on a hunger strike? Nonviolence is a piece of theater. You need an audience. What can you do when you have no audience? People have the right to resist annihilation." End quote. That was from Arundhati Roy. So it frustrates me so much when the media goes into the same old freaking two-step. It's the same thing they do every time there's any kind of violence. Oh, we condemn violence on both sides. You should be condemning violence from the people who are perpetrating violence, not from the people who are enduring it. Okay? Like Arundhati said, can the hungry go on a hunger strike? Oh, oh, okay.